Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Studio 78 podcast. I am your host, Nache from NacheSnow.com. Welcome to episode 146. As always, you can find the show notes for this page over at NacheSnow.com/147. Any links that we mentioned from the show will be over there. And while you're over there, go ahead and sign up for my newsletter. All right, so who do we have on today? I have on Miss Amy Hindman, the owner of St. Virginia, who is a natural dye textile artist and a designer of fashion and home goods. I really love her style and aesthetic. It's just like all the things that I love. So I was so glad to be able to have her on here and chat. And we talk about a little bit of everything about how the pandemic totally affected her business because just like, well, I don't want to do too many spoilers, but a year before she had just quit her job. So then after the pandemic, she had to make some moves. And we talk about what inspired her to start the business. We go into eco-friendly materials and why it's important for her to use those. I mean, we talk about all the things, you guys, finding the right target customer, how to acquire customers without living on social media because she's not really a social media person, but she's still able to make sales. So I love the tips that she shared. And then of course, we had to talk about productivity and she talks to us about setting quarterly goals. Those are just some of the things that we dive into, but I think you guys will find this episode really interesting because we covered a variety of topics. So, a couple of housekeeping things. I'll put it out on my newsletter this week, but the new website, my storefront is up, dreamsplansideas.com. I did finally switch it over from Squarespace to Shopify again. So, I love being back on Shopify. I'm going to have LaKay on again, of course, so we could talk about what we were able to accomplish in January and what we are trying to do in February and March. So I'll give you guys more details about that later, but be sure to check it out. Dreams, plans, ideas. You might find something over there that you really like. All right. Other than that, you guys know the drill. Sharing is caring, my friends. If you find this episode inspirational and you think it will help someone, share away, my loves. And also, if you love the podcast, please rate me 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, thumbs up on YouTube, rate me wherever you may be listening to this from. And remember to hit that subscribe button. Okay, so let's just jump into this. Here's Amy. Hello, Amy, and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here talking to you today.
I love your work. And before I just jump into what you're doing, I just would love for you to tell the listeners just a little bit about you.
Okay, absolutely. My brand is St. Virginia. I am a natural dye textile artist and a fashion and home goods designer. And my journey has been a long and winding road. So I will have a lot to talk about in terms of what got me from point A to point B. And I hope that it's valuable to, everyone who's listening.
I always love to ask my guests, do you do this full time or part time?
Well, this is part of the beauty of COVID, right? I say that sarcastically, but I was doing this full time and things really shifted a lot when COVID happened. And so I'm doing it part-time now. I also am a contract oncology writer. So I do that. It's a great setup because I can do that part-time and then I also can work on my textiles. So I do both. And it really did. I had so many challenges like everyone has when COVID happened, and I have 2 small girls. And I think sometimes people think it sounds really lovely to have your children involved in your studio practice somehow. It sounds lovely to have your studio at home and your daughters can help you dye and make fabric. But the reality is it is a business, and it's really tough when you don't have that space and that time carved out and dedicated to your practice. It's super important. When COVID happened and schools closed and everyone, was hunkered down, and that really took over my work, my studio space. And so everything had to change at that point. And so it did. I kept making things for a while, but it got really tough for a while. So I realized, well, we have to really shift the trajectory here and figure out a new way to carry on. And it's not going to look like what it did a year ago. It was particularly hard for me because I had really just started gaining a lot of momentum in my business. I had quit my corporate job a year prior to start St. Virginia full time. And that was all going really, really well. But the business model that I had, a lot of classes and teaching workshops, natural dye workshops, as part of my business model. And so all of those were canceled, of course. I started running into problems with sourcing. Sourcing sustainable organic textiles is a huge part of the ethos of my business. And everyone started having issues with the supply chain. Of course, we're still having a lot of issues with the supply chain. But leading up to the point that I decided to leave my job and go full time, I had spent years just figuring out what fabrics I wanted to use that aligned with my values and that were really beautiful and soft and that I could ensure were really well crafted. And all of these things go into getting there. And I use building relationships with this small suppliers that I know that have ethical practices and that are GOTS certified, which is the Global Organic Textile Standard. That's really important to me. And so I couldn't get my fabric. So essentially that my business stopped, and I had to say, okay, well, within these constraints, how do I still move forward? And what is that going to look like? So I had tons of fabric that I have dyed and worked on. So I really started making different things using what I had, putting my production plans on hold, and making things with the things that I already had on hand for really a year. And then I started doing more contract work again, writing, which is doing in my corporate job. I think it was really tough. And for another thing that happened, for example, was I was getting some press. I was going to be on the cover of kind of a local publication, but still it was a really big deal, really awesome. And that was one of the things where normally it would be sort of like out in the community, everyone would see.
Right.
And it was right when, I think it was like the March, April, whenever that was. When did it even start? I mean, I'm in a time, I think it was like March 2020.
Yeah. Like right in the end of March is when everything just shut down.
Yes. And so it was the May, June issue that I was going to be on the cover. And then they instead wanted to focus on COVID. And so then I was like inside the magazine, which is totally fine, still amazing. But no one was even out. It wouldn't be on the newsstand where anybody would really even go out and see it. Just everything changed so quickly. And again, it was like right as things
like that's life for you.
That's exactly. Yep. So I think, man, it's obviously been super challenging for everyone, but I think now, 2 years out, it's almost been 2 years. Gosh.
Yeah, it's crazy.
I know, it is absolutely crazy. I think I felt really kind of angry, honestly, for a little while. First, I was in shock, trying to pivot, and then I Made that work for a bit. And then I just was getting really exhausted because my girls were home and everyone was
Mm.
getting tired, especially anyone who has, I think you're just tired from just the nature of the world and everything that's going on in general. I think it's very mentally draining, but not having your normal inspiration and normal joy and normal escape
Yeah.
also was really exhausting. And then like I said, I was just in that mode where, okay, now I need to put energy into making sure that I'm making money, which is not going to now be happening in my business the way it was a year ago. And then when I talk about anger, it's wow, that I was just really angry that it felt for a little bit like, wow, I have worked so hard and got to this place finally.
Mm-hmm.
And it feels like all of that is wasted. And the reality is it of course wasn't wasted and isn't. I think as a business owner, of course, those kinds of things happen all the time. And that's part of me getting stronger as a CEO is really embracing those struggles, and they feel like failures at the time, but of course they're not. You have to pass them a bit to then realize, gosh, I'm so hard on myself, and why am I blaming myself for COVID for one thing?
Right. A worldwide pandemic.
Not my fault that the global supply chain has been upended, but it still felt like, man, could I have prepared for this better? Could I have been short-sighted? Should I have better planned for multiple revenue streams? Did I put too much emphasis on the revenue that I would be getting from workshops? And coming out of it, it gave me so much insight into how to build really strong foundations and even safer foundations. And again, it took me just recently where I think we're all coming back to life a little bit. We all are feeling there's a resurgence of hope. It feels like, to me at least.
I agree.
And so I think now looking back, I can see the value and just all of the growth that came out of this incredibly hard time in my business. And doing things like, man, it really had to open my mind into thinking, again, how do I creatively use the resources that are available to me now? How do I really fill myself up again so that I can move forward within these constraints? And maybe I was thinking too narrowly before. And so how can I expand my thinking about my business? If I can't source this particular sort of fabric that I used before, well, that's not going to be the end of my business. What am I going to source?
Like pivot. Yeah. Going back to pre-COVID, or as I heard someone refer to it as BC, before COVID.
Totally. Oh my gosh, it's a different world. Yeah.
On the podcast, I've talked to several guests about there's no right or wrong way to do things. Some people have a 9 to 5 and then have their business on the side. Some people choose to quit their job and then do their things full time. And then there's people who've gone back and forth. It's just a season of life. And there's a lot of different variables that help people make that decision. So for you, I'm just curious, what made you feel ready to do your job, at least at the time, do your business at the time full time and take that leap? Because that's scary.
I did not feel ready. I did not feel ready at all. But I did know I had just conviction and an intuitiveness that it was something that I couldn't do just partially for even a season. And even at that time when I decided to leave my job, I still was okay. And I helped myself feel safer knowing that I could go back to that. But I also knew that I really had to dive deep for a bit and kind of see what that looked like. And just in terms of time, I knew that I could not do that anymore, working full time being a mom and doing St. Virginia to the level at that point that I knew I needed to do it because I needed to feel that commitment. I needed the fear of knowing that my income was coming from me and generated from St. Virginia, that I could get really serious and in every way about making that happen. So I had to, just knowing myself, I knew that I had to dive in fully or it wasn't going to happen. I wasn't going to figure out all the pieces. I think again, hindsight is 2020, but when I look back, I do think that we have this feeling sometimes of, okay, now's the time to move. Now is the time to take this leap. Mm-hmm. And I felt that so intuitively. I think that there were some things that I could have done to make more of a bridge instead of such a drastic leap. And knowing that now actually makes me feel better and it makes me feel smarter and wiser. And I just didn't have the know-how about business and what it would take to really be a CEO of a small business. I didn't have the knowledge and the understanding to really even know what it would take to build that bridge. But if I were talking to someone now who really felt like they were ready to dive in, I would say there are some things that you could get lined up first.
I was going to say, some examples. I know people are listening and they're like, ooh, what should I do? They're, people who are on the cusp right now of taking that leap.
Really, I would say just getting your finances in order in a way that they feel just foundationally strong. This is something that no one wants to hear. Well, if you have any debt, then don't start a business. And I'm not saying that if you have any debt, you shouldn't start a business because, well, most people, the reality is, have debt.
Yeah.
And so I think, though, that you do need to, if there's anything in your financial, if you have any financial skeletons in your closet or anything hanging around that feels dusty or murky or sketchy or that you're afraid to face, that you need to dive into that head first before you start spending money on something else that's going to bring you income right away. And I think that's the other piece, is to, even if you have been dabbling and it's been doing really well, I think it always just takes longer than we want it to and that we think that it will, even if we are having success. Because the reality is, too, if we're growing, then all of that money coming in from your business is not going to you to live on and for a paycheck. That's all going back into your business. And that was a mistake that I absolutely made, thinking that I'm generating a lot of revenue now where it feels safe enough for me to take that leap and leave my job. But that revenue is not my paycheck. That revenue is going to St. Virginia, and it's not big enough yet to pay me to live on. So I think it's truly the money piece. You just have to be so clear on that and make sure that you are really thinking all of that through and wisely, and thinking of it more as you're paying the business and not so much yourself. So that's a hard thing to learn if you left your job.
Once you've jumped, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And then curious, when you did make the jump, what were your revenue streams? Was it primarily the workshops, or were you also selling like clothes or accessories at that time?
I was doing workshops and I was still generating most revenue from my e-commerce store. So that was primarily where I was getting money and getting sales, selling scarves and home goods. I wasn't actually doing dresses yet at that time. Began starting my dress line right before COVID happened. So that was a little inconvenient also, but it's okay. We're going through that now. So yes, e-commerce was primarily my main revenue generator. And then the classes were just not easy, actually. I don't want to say easy. They were pretty tough, but super fun and really lucrative. And then I was also doing some markets in the beginning of my
Mm,
I have phased them out a little bit. They're incredibly valuable for getting feedback and figuring out who your customer base really is and what people have to say about your products in person. But it wasn't the most lucrative for me. It's not a lot of bang for your buck in terms of revenue, a lot of bang for
mhm.
your buck in terms of figuring out those marketing pieces, but not so much money.
Right.
Still really, really good. And I'm not opposed to doing them, but it would have to be a really specific niche now, like knowing more so who my customer is. So yeah, e-commerce mostly, and then the classes a little bit.
Yeah, and so for those who aren't in like the eco community or might not know a lot of information about that, you mentioned when the pandemic hit, and I had some people on here who talked also about just how COVID really changed the trajectory of their lives and their business. But what kind of things do you look for in purchase when you are creating eco products? Because some people are like, what does that mean? What kind of fabric? Isn't fabric? So
Yeah,
if you can educate folks who might not be that familiar with that side of the industry.
absolutely. So primarily it is natural fabric. So if you are thinking of anything that grows and is not produced by petroleum, basically, for lack of a better word. If you're thinking of polyester, that's not something that grows from the ground. It's not a natural fiber. It's man-made. And there are most fabrics have some derivative of a petroleum-based man-made product. But if you're talking about natural fibers, silk, hemp is a big one now that is gaining in popularity. Cotton is a huge thing that I focus on, and in particular, organic cotton. And wool also. I don't love wool. I don't work with it a lot because part of the reason that I use eco-friendly fibers and natural fibers is because they're healthier for whomever is wearing it. It's
Mm.
much better for sensitive skin. A lot of people have eczema and skin irritations because of so many chemicals in just our world today, everywhere. Really, they're ubiquitous, but they're ubiquitous also in fashion and in clothing and in home goods. There's a lot of chemicals that are used in the manufacturing process that are not good for us or for our homes. And in the process of making those, they're really bad for the environment too, and they contaminate waterways and soil and all those things. And the reason that it's so important to me is because I was diagnosed with cancer when I was 36. And
Mm.
that's really what started. That was the beginning of St. Virginia for me, really. I was diagnosed with cancer. I went through the whole 9 yards, chemotherapy and radiation and multiple surgeries. And I just wanted a scarf. I wanted a scarf for my bald head. And there's some great organizations out there who will send you a free scarf if you have cancer, which is really wonderful. But I did that. There were, I think, 2 different companies. And when I got them, they just they weren't nice. They were rough and they weren't what I had in mind. I wanted something that felt really luxurious and soft and that felt like healing on my skin and made me feel not so bad. And
Mm-hmm.
as I was starting to do this I changed my diet once I was diagnosed with cancer and I went on this crazy healing journey.
Mm.
It started making me really understand so much more about what's in our food, what's toxins essentially is what it is. And when I wanted this scarf for my head, and then I thought, well, I want to, maybe I can make something. I've always been a maker. I've always
Mm.
made things. And I wanted organic textiles as I was learning more about organic versus non-organic. And I thought, I don't want any of this crap on my body anymore that I have
Yeah.
been mindlessly, unknowingly buying because, like you said, why would you not even, this isn't even on your radar. It certainly wasn't
Hmm.
mine. And also we want things, we don't want to spend a lot of money on things like things that we need, like clothes, for example, and even food. But as you start raveling these layers of the way that things are made, it changed everything. The way that I was a maker. From there on out, I couldn't just buy any yarn anymore or any fabric. It became really important to me to understand exactly what I was making and exactly how the materials that I was using in my practice, how were those made? Go
Hmm.
to the beginning. A lot of it has to do with where those things that we're using in our art, in our products, are made at the very beginning. Where did it start? And
Yeah.
so eco-friendly fibers are natural. They have been grown naturally without organic cotton is grown without pesticides, so it's not hurting the people who are farming it. It's not hurting the land. It's not hurting their communities. It uses less water to grow. It is, and then better for the person who's making something with it, and then the person,
Hmm.
wearing it or using it and bringing it into their home or on their body. And so that's why I love organic cotton.
And then for the organic cotton, I'm assuming it's hard to source that fabric within the US. Most of the time, you have to go overseas to probably get it, even at an affordable price. And affordable is debatable, maybe at this point, since prices have gone up.
Absolutely. Yeah, when I first started sourcing, I actually really wanted to source organic cotton in the US, and there are organic cotton farmers in Texas and in California
Mm.
primarily. And they right now are manufacturing certain types of cotton, and I use, it's a cotton jersey, and I do use that in some of my products, but
Mm.
there are others that are sourced from India. And there's a particular supplier that I use that's in the United States, and they vet their farmers. They're very good about ensuring that the farmers or the where they're sourcing their organic cotton from has gone through all of the certification processes to ensure that it's ethical. It's not cheap. So my products are premium prices. Unfortunately, I wish that they could be lower. I think that was a hard thing for me to learn too, is I would love for my products to be able to be more affordable to everyone. And it was a lot of mindset work, even that I had to do around that to ensure that I was actually charging what I needed to charge in order to sustain my business, even though it felt like a lot of money to me.
Yeah.
And to a lot of my friends. But that's the reality. And that's also part of being a business owner and ensuring that women who are making and honoring craft and heritage craft and making,
Mm.
that when we charge a premium, that affects everyone. If we are undercharging, that's negatively affecting any woman maker in the world. So
Hmm.
I would urge everyone to raise your prices.
Yeah. Well, when I think about it too, and I don't know. So, for example, and I'm not picking on anthropology here because I love anthropology,
Yeah,
but I think sometimes when people go into places like anthropology, they expect to pay more, and then they pay more. Some people will rumble, but for the most part, if you're an anthropology fan or that type of store fan, you just pay for it. But then when it's like a small business, I don't know if it's just like a mindset thing. People just automatically assume that it should be, I guess, a little bit cheaper and a little bit more affordable. But I'm like, no, actually, Anthro probably could afford to go down more, right? Whereas you, as a small business owner, you're literally dyeing these things by hand, right? Like the hours that you're taking to make that scarf. If you sold that same scarf for 25 $50, like it would be like working for $3 an hour.
exactly. Yeah.
This would be
And that's
crazy.
even taking into consideration all of the overhead things that you're having to invest in. So yeah, you're 100,000% anthropology and these other places. And honestly, when I look at their prices, I think, man, they still are probably who are they taking advantage of to even charge this price? Like if you
Because
start
some of
thinking
it's
about
low, right? When you think of
I
employees, leasing space. Yeah.
totally, I know. Or for example, I sell a hand dyed silk ribbon that's really expensive, but it takes me a long time to make. And then I think, man, but mine is more expensive than Anthropologie's. Theirs is polyester, but it's really cheap. And so how are they making this and
Yeah.
selling it so cheaply? It's for certain things. Some other things obviously are way more expensive.
Yeah.
But I think you don't have that understanding of what goes into making something unless you're a maker. But I think going back to your point about, I think if someone thinks, oh, it's handcrafted, she's just having this little like scarf dyeing business, on the
Right.
side, and it's all just fun and games for her, and oh, how cute, which is why I'm not on Etsy anymore. And that's a whole other conversation. But I think that, well, I'll just say, I think Etsy does commodify things that some things are not great on Etsy, and it is that what I just described. But some things are really amazing on Etsy, and people are also underpricing what they should. But it's really important to explain your process. And I
Mm-hmm.
think educating your customers and sharing your journey and showing everything that goes into what you're making is the only way that you can really charge that much for a product or yeah, I mean, whatever it is. I think process is a big deal, and people do
Mm-hmm.
connect to that. That's why they're buying from you as opposed to Anthropologie. And that is what sets you apart, because frankly, most of us are not making anything completely unique in the world at all anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Find hand dyed scarves at a handful of places, and it's becoming more and more popular. And that's true for most anyone who's making things. But what people are going to connect to is sharing that journey with them, and that's what they connect with.
And then I've been on Etsy before, off and on for various reasons, but I 100% agree with you because I think of even I picked up a hobby last year, which was stained glass, like creating stained glass, which I absolutely love. But the thing is, after really learning how to do it and understanding like how many hours go into making even like a very simple piece and how much glass costs, and of course, as I was like on this journey of learning how to do this for myself as a hobby, I was looking everywhere for inspiration and just seeing what was out there. And I was like mortified when I went on Etsy because I was like, oh my goodness, somebody has this like intricate piece of glass that I know took them forever to create,
Yes.
and they're selling it for like $50.
Yeah.
You cannot make a living off of that. And at
Yeah.
that point, you're really just giving it away for free. You can't even, you're at that point, you're not even recouping your cost.
Right. Yeah. It's tragic for so many business owners when I think of that exact problem. And I think the other thing though is that it does take time to build credibility, because
Mm-hmm.
even though something is handcrafted, it does need to be handcrafted well with the high
Mm-hmm.
of craftsmanship in a way that is equal to or exceeds what you would get at someone who is more reputable, because there is that piece that feels like it's a hobby, maybe it's handcrafted. So that means that they maybe are not as well versed in all of the techniques. Maybe it isn't as important to them because it feels like a side hustle.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it isn't as reliable in terms of even when it gets here and how it arrives and if I can return it or not. Is it reliable? So I think
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
it is super important and takes time to build that level of trust up with
Mm.
people.
And then I'm curious too for you, because I agree. Like when you first learn how to do something, even when I'm sure when you dyed your first piece, if you showed us that first piece several years ago versus what you can do now, you'd be like, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
But when you do get to a level where you do have good craftsmanship, I think what people struggle with is they know they should be charging more. They feel a little guilty, right? And then there's also this thought that no one will buy it. And I always tell people, like, there is a market. You just have to find people who are willing to maybe invest in more quality pieces because they understand your story and they understand the craftsmanship behind it. How did you find your people and how were you able to connect with them?
I think it took a while, honestly. It was not necessarily who I expected it to be. And I think that doing a lot of market research, finding out who your competitors are, looking in all the places to see who is buying from other brands that are similar to yours.
Mm.
And that took a lot of time for me, but it's also, I think, pretty fun if you can get over the jealousy part of looking at a brand who is similar to yours and seeing this huge following, and you're like, what the hell, man? Like, they need to be following me, and like, why are they getting all the breaks or something like that? But chances are there's so many things that go into that, and so while Instagram and social media can be really, really hard, it's really hard for me sometimes. I stay off of it actually a lot because I find that it can exactly what can cause me to have this kind of comparison envy, but it also can be super helpful from a market research perspective, and that really is how I do a lot of figuring out about my customers, potential customers, and and just gives me ideas for the way that other people are doing things and reaching those customers that I know are very similar to mine. Something else I was going to say that's sort of about pricing is when I changed my pricing and increased it a bit more over time, my customers actually got better and I had to work less and kind of more authentically. I could spend more time making my product even better. And I was getting to know more and more who my ideal customer was. And that didn't really, it was like originally there was like all of these potential customers down here. And I wanted to reach all of them. And my prices were lower. And they were coming, in and buying. And then I got a little more clear and raised my prices a little bit more. And then my customer base felt like it was getting like a little bit smaller and tighter, but I was getting repeat customers and they absolutely, loved the product. And then it came up again, and then that same process happened, and then it started I don't want to do it by hand. Sort of like builds up, and you just learn more and more, and you get better, and then you raise your prices again, and then your customers, it enables you to build a better product and for your customers to see your value even more. And so I think that again just takes time. That's not something that happens right away. It's all, you're just learning about your customers as you're going along and getting better in your prices.
No, it reminds me of, because I follow like tons of kind of traditional artists like painters, watercolorists, and so forth, for example. And it's interesting because some of them will create like small pieces and do prints, and I can get their prints for $50. Where
Right.
some of them, I look at their accounts and I'm like, well, one day I'll buy their $5,000 painting.
Yeah.
So for them, they've gotten to the point where I think it's like what you were saying, whereas they want to put more time and effort into these pieces. And so they're going to have less customers, right, than someone who might be doing smaller pieces for $100 or $200, but they're able to invest more time into their craft. and also get paid a living wage to do it so they can actually pay their rent or mortgage, right?
Yeah.
Without killing
Yeah,
themselves.
absolutely. And,
And it,
I do
yeah.
think I have thought about that too, kind of, okay, as I am getting to that place where I care more about spending time making something that I absolutely love and that my ideal customer loves. And maybe it's not for everyone and it's not affordable to
Mm-hmm.
everyone right now, but it still is my goal to expand into some things that are not hand dyed, where this is sort of something I never would have envisioned for my business before, but that I have thought about and have been working on in the past year is doing some of my prints digitally so that there is a different type of customer that I can reach. And that's not exactly the same product. It's a little bit different, but it's a riff on my textile design. So that is a new revenue stream, a new sort of endeavor that I see growing out of this really authentic, intimate, sort of hand dyed piece that's really expensive and super labor intensive and just a labor of love. And that's all these amazing things that are super important to my brand and to me. But I still want it to be for more people. And I want to do some things that are easier. And that's part of scaling, right? Just figuring out, okay, I still want to do these really special pieces and I want them to be paid what they're worth and for me to be paid for what I'm worth and to build a business that's sustainable. But how do I still scale this in a way that can keep going and growing? And what does that look like?
I mean, it goes back to what you were saying in the beginning of one of your lessons learned, which is the diversifying your income, right?
Yes, absolutely. And that's ongoing. But each time you do that, that's a new energy and a
Mm,
new effort. So I do think you have to it goes back to the pieces of like the foundations have to be really strong first. So you get really good at this one thing that you love. And then it's like I would have loved to have had more revenue streams early on so that I could have protected myself in COVID and in any other challenges that come up where your business needs to pivot. But the truth is still those things do take time because you don't have that insight and you don't see where your business is going to go potentially until it's time, until you get there, until you have that insight just from doing it, you know?
and for the people listening too, it's interesting because there's no, I think, right or wrong, but I do think it's just having a plan because it was interesting. I was listening to this podcast where I think they're sisters, two sisters, and they run a sticker business. So talking about having to sell a lot of stickers to make right a
Yeah.
profit. You're talking about $2, $3, but
Yeah.
they have found a way. And part of their interview, they were talking, well, interview or their conversation with each other, they were talking about scaling. And if people wanted to start a sticker business, like these are the things you have to think of so you're able to scale and then make more money, right? And
Yeah.
so, yeah, it's interesting. There's a lot of ways to get there. It's just how you want to spend your time and energy. And it seems like what makes sense for you.
Absolutely. Yes. It's so personal. That's why I get it's hard. I've done masterminds and sort of business courses and different things where there's this effort to create an educational program, right? Where someone who wants to start a business or leave their 9 to 5 or start this creative endeavor where they can get there.
Mm.
And there are always these sort of nuggets that you can pick up. So I think that they're valuable, but there just is never an easy way to figure out what that way is going to be for
Yeah.
you. It really is hard and it has to feel good for you and fit in
Mm-hmm.
your life and every season of your life. And there does have to be these pivots and these different revenue streams and all these pieces, but there's no easy way to get there and there's no one size fits all. And the only way you
Mm-hmm.
figure it out is through trial and error and just start where it takes you. And that's all there is to it, unfortunately.
Right. I just wanted to ask you because I know, we're still going through the pandemic, so not sure if you started back the in-person workshops or not, or even going out to events, for example. And you kind of mentioned like you try to stay off of social media. So I know someone listening out there is like, me too. I don't want to be on Instagram and TikTok and all the things, but I still want to get customers. How have you been able to do that without living on social media?
Well, I will say that an email list is one of the most powerful things in my
Mm,
business. And that is one of the nuggets that I picked up from one of those business programs that I did. If I didn't get anything else from the thing that worked for me, it was the email list, because there's nothing that generates sales for me more than sending out an email to my
mm-hmm.
list subscribers, because they're invested, they're waiting, they're ready to see what you have. They want to hear from you, they want to know about you, and they are ready and primed to buy from you. And so learning how to do opt-ins, something where you can start capturing email subscribers. When you do your website, that the one thing that I did pay for someone to do, and I have done mostly everything on my own, the one thing I did pay a little bit down the road was having someone optimize my website for SEO. It
Mm,
wasn't a lot of money, but it's really a numbers game in terms of sending out emails and getting eyeballs on your website. You can really figure out how much money you can make just based on how many people are seeing your site and how many people are on your email list. You get that going, and if you can even commit to that to some degree, you don't really need social media as much. For me, it's still a nice to have when I'm feeling like I'm mentally in a good place to be on social media. And I still love to share sometimes, depending on what's happening in the world, I guess, what's happening in my life or in my brain. But I think that social media is not a reliable way to generate sales. It's never been a sales generator for me. Video, I think, is great for building relationships, and video is more powerful to me than just posting. But you can still do that via email. I don't really think social media, unless you're a huge brand and you're on it all the time, which I never ever want to do. That's pure hell to me. Everyone is different, but that's not for me. I think that you can get around it as long as still you're doing some type of marketing in whatever way feels good to you. And marketing can take a lot of energy. So I think if you just choose one or two things that feel like you can invest good quality time and effort into that instead of trying to be in all the places, that is a lot more valuable.
And I feel, because I'm going to, of course, when I open up, I'm going to say, like, hey, I have someone on here that does natural dye, and she has all these beautiful scarves and clothing. And then people are going to be like, you didn't even ask her, if I want to get into natural dyeing, what should I do? So,
Oh, God.
God. But let me know if that's going down a whole other rabbit hole.
Well, I have actually some resources on my website,
Oh,
and
shit. Okay.
there's a place on my page where you can figure out where you can source natural dyes, where you can even source fabric, and some awesome books that you can start with if you want to learn how to use natural dyes. And anyone can learn how to do it. It's amazing.
Perfect. I will link that, people, in the show notes. So don't worry. You will learn how to do it. And if you find that it's a little too much work, that's okay, because you could just buy from her shop and it's already done for you.
Exactly.
So just a couple of wrap-up questions. The first one is, how do you stay organized? Any tools, software, or techniques you'd like to share with the audience, or the listeners, rather?
Sure. I am technologically averse, so I use old school spreadsheets. I've tried different project management tools like Trello and other things, but for me, I have a notebook that I prefer to use because I'm so visual. I
Mm,
like to really draw lots of arrows and use pretty pens, and it makes organizing more fun for me, and like doodling notes, and I'll do little sketches. But I also do have more, it's just an Excel spreadsheet, because that's what I know how to do, formulas. I can do like the more technical stuff on there. I don't want to really be learning any new software. So I use that because I know it, and it is a way that I can easily track my revenue. I do use like just my calendar on my computer to do some time blocking if I know if I have a deadline coming up, and I will be a little bit hardcore about time blocking sometimes, because otherwise I can so easily get distracted and will lose, I don't know, a day to like doing meaningless stuff. Pinterest for inspiration. And then, oh shoot, it's been 5 hours. Sometimes even I'll set an alarm on my phone. But in terms of more broad goal making, I do have quarterly goals. I usually will come up with like 10 things that I want to get done, knowing that I probably will accomplish 3 of them. So I will have sort of like write 10 things down that I want to do in a 3-month period that are super important for my business, that are revenue generating. Those are the big things. I'll have like, I really am thinking of it in terms of money, because if I'm not thinking about it in terms of money, then it is a hobby, right? It's not a business. Some of them can be strategic, like longer term revenue related goals, but it is still, it's a way that helps me be more focused in terms of my time, because I do want to be focusing on revenue generating goals. So I do that every quarter, and I highlight the kind of big ones, and then the others are nice to have. And I don't feel bad about spending time on the other things that are nice to have, but just keeping like the big ones top of mind, knowing that those are going to be the things that are actually going to make me money. And then even at the beginning of the week, I do like to give myself a lot of white space, and kind of, I just cushion everything so profoundly, because I know that like I said, I mean, I can waste time in like inspiration land really easily, but I do get really great ideas from that too. So it's important to have that in there. So I just give myself a lot of buffer, and it's something that I have learned now from getting burned out at different times, that I know, just giving myself a lot of grace and knowing that I do need time just for thinking and being inspired, and to be loose about my schedule, but big about my goals and like the bigger picture.
And then just for the listeners out there, because we just a couple of episodes ago had Nache on here. You guys know Nache. We were talking about that. Do you go big or small with your 10 things? Are they like very specific? Update a website, create 2 new products, or is it increase revenue by X%?
They're both. Well, they're usually the big 10 are, and like the top 3 are more loose, but then I do really drill down on those more. So yes, I said I will have the 10, but I always go like way into the weeds, into detail on like, how am I going to get to each of those things? What do I need to do to actually make that happen? I start big and then I drill down, because if I don't get into sort of the minutia, then it feels overwhelming to me, because I need to know, at least it will probably change, but I need to at least have an idea of what I need to do in order to make that happen.
Yeah. And then do you have a hobby? Or is, this is already like very creative.
It is. I do.
But sometimes people have like random stuff like bicycling or hiking or like dancing or something.
Not really. This is my hobby. I do love it. I'm obsessed. I mean, I will say it feels like, like working with yarn, crocheting and knitting is something I've always done, and it feeds into my business, but it still is like dabbling in some kind of craft that's not specific to St. Virginia, I feel like is my hobby. And looking at fashion magazines, I could look at just, magazines for hours. And also, what else was I going to say? Oh, reading. Just, I love reading business books. I love reading I'm always working on my freaking mindset, because it just is never ending. I'm always having just things that come up that I know that I need to work on. So I'm always looking for great books on, limiting beliefs or neuroscience or money, a lot about money too. I grew up in a home where we didn't have, we really didn't learn anything about money. We were mostly poor. And so that has been the biggest learning curve just in business. Is so obvious, just money. But I think if you haven't really learned about that a lot just growing up or in your life, that hasn't been part of like your cultural dialogue in your family or in your circle of friends or wherever it may be, it's a lot to learn and shift your thinking around.
And then as you were talking, did one book come to mind that you would want me to throw in the show notes?
Get Rich, Lucky Bitch.
Yeah. That's a popular one.
Yeah, that's a good one. I think Jen Sincero's book.
Love her book.
You're a badass at making money. And oh gosh, I can't think of the one about under earning that's like an old classic, and I can't think of what her name is right now. Overcoming Under Earning. That's the name of it. I can't think of who the author is.
I'll find it.
Rachel Rogers' book. I got her book last year on
We Should All Be Millionaires.
Yes.
That was good. I just read that one. Yeah.
Good. Love that. And then some things that too, they are not specifically about money, but The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer, which is more like a spiritual God being in the flow kind of book. That one was really good too. I recommend it.
That's perfect. All of those folks will be in the show notes. And then last thing, Amy, the listeners are like, we need more of Amy. How do they sign up for your newsletter? Where do they find you? Please tell them all the places.
Okay, stvirginia.com is my website. You can get on my email list there and just find out all of the things that I'm up to. I have a blog there, which I don't post on all the time, but you can read about my whole journey on stvirginia.com. And I'm also on Instagram at St. Virginia Textiles.
Perfect. Well, thanks again, Amy. This was like a great conversation. I could talk to you forever about all the things. So appreciate you, taking the time to share your story and your tips.
Absolutely. This was awesome. Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it. So fun.
Well, I hope you guys enjoyed that episode. I could have talked to Amy forever and just really dug into her story even more. We kind of surface level cover a lot of topics, but with her, I could have gone deep into so many different things. But I hope that it inspired you guys to just get going. And I love how she provided all of her lessons learned. I think when my guests do that, it is the most valuable for you guys and for me too. So we can learn from each other and learn from things that where we took missteps, right? I hate to call them mistakes, as she said, but it's where we learned and we can help someone else make better decisions in the future. And I hope her business continues to thrive and that she does or is able in the future to live off of St. Virginia once again. Anyway, it was great having Amy on here, and I would love to hear your thoughts on how it inspired you. All right. Please share away with anyone who you think might love this. Please rate me 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, thumbs up on YouTube, subscribe to all the different places. And don't forget to check out my website, people, the storefront, dreamsplansideas.com, and let me know what you think. If something is broken or wonky or whatever, just shoot me an email over at hello@nachesnow.com. I am never offended by feedback. All right, you guys have a good morning, noon, or night, and I'll catch you guys next time. Bye.